Welcome to Stories of Brave Mothers, a channel dedicated to telling real and touching stories of brave mothers from around the world.
Have you ever imagined working as a cleaning lady in the home of a woman who constantly humiliates you, not knowing that one day she would become your son's future mother-in-law? This is the story of a brave mother who swallowed her pride, stayed silent, and endured every humiliation, all for the love of her son. But fate had a plot twist so powerful that even the hardest of hearts couldn't resist it. Get ready for a true story of resilience, forgiveness, and transformation, one that will touch you from beginning to end. In a modest suburb of Richmond, Virginia, lived a woman named Margaret Turner, affectionately known by the neighbors as Miss Maggie, a woman with a serene gaze, gray hair always tied in a simple bun, and hands marked by years of hard work. She was one of those brave mothers time doesn't weaken, it only makes stronger. Every wrinkle on her face was a reminder of battles fought and won, and for her, the greatest of all had a name: Andrew, her only son. From early on, Margaret faced life with resilience. She became a widow at a young age, just 38, when Andrew was still only a 9-year-old boy. Her husband, a construction worker, died in a job site accident. From that day on, she made a promise to herself. Her son would never go without. She worked as a seamstress, then as an attendant at a laundromat, baked cakes to order, and even sold scented candles at the local fair. Everything to keep her boy in school, fed, and with dignity. She never accepted charity, but never turned down work either. Years passed, and Andrew grew up seeing his mother as the embodiment of quiet strength. He was a kind, polite young man with a smile that reminded everyone of his father. He earned a partial scholarship to a community college and later landed a good job as an IT technician. At 26, Andrew was ready to take a big step in life. He had just proposed to his girlfriend, Emma. Emma was a charming young woman, a graduate in interior design, with a gentle personality and a contagious laugh. Their relationship had started in an unlikely way. He met her while fixing a client's computer, who happened to be her mother. Fate seemed to smile on them both. Andrew shared the engagement news with his mother, his eyes glowing with excitement. And of course, she teared up. But there was one part of the story he hadn't revealed yet: who Emma's family really was. The plan was simple. They would have a small civil wedding and save the celebration for later. But Margaret, with that silent lioness spirit, couldn't accept that her son would get married without at least a small ceremony. Even if it's just a nice dress for her, a few simple flowers, and a homemade cake. My son will get married with dignity, she'd say to herself, while dropping coins into a glass jar labeled Wedding Fund. One autumn afternoon, she heard from a neighbor that a mansion in the upscale Glen Allen neighborhood was looking for a part-time housekeeper. It was far, and the job required physical effort that weighed on her 60-year-old body, but the pay was good. Without hesitation, Margaret grabbed her worn-out coat, placed her documents in a cloth purse, and headed there to apply. She knocked on the door without knowing what awaited her. A tall, elegant woman answered, with a proud posture and calculating eyes. She wore a spotless white blazer and heels that looked like they had never touched a dusty floor. Her name was Victoria Caldwell. "Do you have references?" Victoria asked, not even inviting her inside. "Yes, ma'am. I've worked in private homes for many years. I know how to iron, wash, organize. I'm very thorough. And can you carry heavy buckets? I may not be young, but I can assure you, I'm efficient." Victoria looked her up and down. The faded purse, the calloused hands, the modest tone of voice. She sighed, as if taking an unnecessary risk, and said, "You can start tomorrow. But let me be clear, I like things done my way." Margaret thanked her with a discreet smile. not knowing that by accepting that job, she was stepping into something far bigger than just cleaning a fancy house. Over the next few weeks, Margaret began coming to Victoria's mansion 3 times a week. The place was stunning. Wide windows, marble staircases, and furniture that looked like it belonged in a design magazine. But the atmosphere was cold, almost hostile. Victoria rarely spoke, always carried herself with a sense of superiority, and gave dry orders as if Margaret's presence were a tolerated nuisance. One day, as Margaret placed a teacup on the coffee table, she heard, "Don't slide that, ma'am. This is Italian wood. I don't know how you do things where you come from, but here, we use coasters." She bit her lip, took a deep breath, and simply replied, "I'm sorry, Miss Victoria. It won't happen again." Despite her employer's coldness, Margaret did her work with excellence. She ironed clothes to perfection, cleaned every corner with care, and always left before sunset, carrying with her the money that slowly filled the wedding jar. What she didn't know, and Andrew had never found the courage to say, was that Emma was Victoria's daughter. Emma was afraid to tell her mother about the engagement. Victoria was known for her elitism and her rigid belief that her daughter should marry someone of equal status. Emma knew Andrew was a good man, but feared her mother's harsh judgment. That's why she kept their relationship a secret, at least for now. Meanwhile, Margaret kept working in that house, swallowing the constant humiliation. In any other situation, she never would have accepted such treatment. But something far greater was at stake, her love for her son. Sometimes, while scrubbing the marble kitchen floor, she'd smile to herself imagining the wedding day. She pictured Emma walking in with a simple white dress, Andrew teary-eyed at the altar, and herself sitting quietly in one of the pews, heart at peace. She didn't need luxury, only dignity. One day, while cleaning the staircase, Margaret overheard a muffled conversation upstairs. It was Victoria on the phone. "Yes, Emma, you may be in love, but marriage isn't just about love. Who is this guy? An IT technician. Where does he live? You know that doesn't fit our family." Margaret froze. That voice, Emma, the name, Andrew. It was too much of a coincidence. Her heart pounded, but she didn't dare go up. She just lowered her eyes to the cleaning rag and kept scrubbing, her mind spinning like a storm. That night, Margaret said nothing during dinner with Andrew. She watched his eyes, that same kind, honest gaze he'd always had, and felt a knot in her throat. Does he know? She wondered. But she chose not to say anything. The wedding was still a secret, and now, so was this. But fate had plans of exposing everything sooner than they expected. The following Saturday, Andrew invited his mother out for a special coffee. He wanted to tell her that Emma had finally found the courage to introduce him to her mother. "She's going to love you, Mom. She just has a tough exterior, but she'll understand." Margaret forced a smile. "That's great, son. I'm rooting for you two." Little did he know that by Monday, that same fancy house would open its doors to her once again. But this time, not as a housekeeper, but as the groom's mother. Margaret barely slept that night. Andrew's words echoed in her mind like thunder in a closed room. "She wants me to come over to her house. She wants me to meet her mother. It'll be tomorrow night, Mom, in Glen Allen. Glen Allen. That same house, that same woman, that mansion where she had spent weeks swallowing humiliation, silencing her pain for the sake of her son, without realizing that on the other side of those cold walls was her future daughter-in-law's mother. Now it all made sense. The arrogant look, the questioning about where she came from, the constant distrust. Victoria Caldwell saw her as beneath her, and couldn't have imagined that the cleaning lady she paid by the hour was the very woman who had raised, with so much love and sacrifice, the man her daughter had fallen in love with. Margaret didn't say a word to Andrew. She simply told him she wouldn't be able to join him for dinner because she had an unmissable church commitment. She made up an excuse, forced a smile, and stayed home with a heavy heart. But life has a way of punishing those who run from the truth, because that night, Victoria Caldwell finally learned the full name of the man about to marry her daughter, Andrew Turner. And the moment Emma said that name, it was as if the ground disappeared beneath Victoria's feet. Her expression froze. "Turner?" she repeated, as if the name stung her mouth. "Yes, Mom. Andrew Turner. I know you're prejudiced, but I love him, and he's a wonderful person." Victoria went silent for a moment, her eyes fixed in space, connecting every memory like threads. Then she abruptly stood up from her chair and walked upstairs without saying another word. Emma remained seated, confused, while Andrew, unsure of what was happening, simply held her hand tighter. Upstairs, Victoria frantically opened the drawer where she kept payment receipts for her employees. There it was, Margaret Turner. It was her. That simple, humble woman with the calm eyes was Andrew's mother. The next day, Margaret arrived for work as usual, sharp at 8 a.m., clean uniform, calm demeanor. But something was different. The automatic gate took longer to open, and when she walked into the house, no one was there to greet her. The mansion was strangely quiet. Suddenly, Victoria's voice echoed from the top of the stairs. "Margaret, come upstairs. Now." Margaret felt a chill run down her spine. That voice left no room for doubt. Something had changed. She slowly climbed the stairs, step by step, until she found Victoria standing in the upstairs sitting room. Her arms were crossed, and her expression was as cold as stone. You knew, didn't you?" Margaret didn't answer. She simply held her gaze steady, as someone who had nothing to hide. "You knew my net worth is $4 million, that my daughter is the heir to a 2,000 square meter property, and you still let your son get close to her." Margaret furrowed her brow, but kept her composure. "Miss Victoria, with all due respect, my son fell in love with your daughter. I only found out who she was recently. Don't give me that soap opera speech. This was a setup, a trap." "A trap?" Margaret gave a sad smile. "You paid me by the hour to scrub the floors of the house where my son would one day be welcomed as a son-in-law. If anyone here was deceived, it wasn't me." Victoria began pacing in circles, flustered, breathing hard, like someone who had just discovered a threat in her own home. "My daughter is not going to marry someone from the lower class. Do you understand? I'll deal with this personally." Margaret walked down the stairs with her heart shattered. She finished the cleaning in silence, collected her pay for the week, her final paycheck, and left through the back door. She knew that door had closed for good, but the hardest part was still ahead. 2 days later, Emma showed up at Margaret's home in tears. She told her everything about the fight with her mother, the prejudice, the attempts to pressure her into calling off the engagement. Victoria had even threatened to cut her off financially, cancel the wedding plans, and interfere with Andrew's job. Margaret welcomed her with tenderness, like a mother would hold her own daughter. "Do you love my son? More than anything," Emma answered through tears. "Then fight for him, because he will fight for you. And I'll be right there with you both." In the days that followed, Margaret's life became a whirlwind. Because of her argument with Victoria, several clients connected to her socially cancelled their cleaning services. References vanished. Phone calls stopped. The wedding jar money was no longer enough. She went back to selling cakes and sweets in the neighborhood, just like in the old days. And still, she didn't complain. Meanwhile, Victoria remained determined to stop the wedding. She tried everything, even threatened to sue Andrew for emotional manipulation, saying he seduced her daughter to climb the social ladder. But the more pressure she applied, the closer Emma and Andrew grew, and the more Margaret was seen by the younger generation as a symbol of dignity. At the local church, people began calling Margaret Mother of the Year. Her story had spread, and so had the affection. Donations started coming in. Dresses, flowers, even food for the ceremony. The wedding became a community effort. Love bred empathy, and empathy turned into solidarity. in the middle of it all, Margaret fell ill. What started as a cold turned into a mild case of pneumonia. The doctors told her to rest, but she insisted on helping, sewing chair covers, picking out songs, handwriting vows with Andrew. One cold Saturday afternoon, while she was stitching the veil Emma would wear, Margaret received an unexpected visitor, Victoria. She walked in without saying a word, looked around the modest house, and for a moment, hesitated. She looked out of place, like a marble statue in a room full of wooden furniture. "I brought this," she said, holding out an envelope. "For the wedding. It's not charity. It's my contribution as the mother of the bride." Margaret took the envelope cautiously. She didn't look inside. She simply nodded in gratitude. "I thought you were against this," she said calmly. Victoria stood silent for a few seconds. Then, with her gaze lowered, she spoke. "I was arrogant, blind. Emma showed me a letter Andrew wrote for her. And she also showed me a photograph." She pulled out an old photo from her pocket. Margaret and Andrew, when he was a child, sitting on the front porch steps, smiling. "You raised an incredible man, Margaret, and I treated you like you were invisible. But you're not. You're the reason he's the man he is. And today, I'm ashamed of how I treated you." Margaret simply nodded. She didn't say, "I forgive you." She didn't need to. The silence between them said everything. A silence full of weight, but also release. Before leaving, Victoria turned and said, "He called me ma'am the first time he met me. And now I understand why. He learned respect from you." And she left. That night, Margaret placed the envelope inside the wedding jar. She didn't tell anyone. She knew no amount of money could ever buy what she had truly earned. Respect, peace, dignity. But one final challenge still lay ahead. The wedding day. Margaret didn't know if she would be welcomed, if there would be stares, whispers, judgment. She didn't know if Victoria, even remorseful, would truly accept the ceremony. She didn't know if her simple dress would feel appropriate in that setting. But she knew one thing. This was the day her son would get married, and she would be there. Little did she know, that day still held the greatest surprise of all. The day dawned with a clear sky and a golden glow that felt hand-picked to bless the moment. It was the big day. Andrew and Emma's wedding would take place in a small Methodist church on the outskirts of Richmond, decorated with wildflowers, string lights, and old wooden pews. Everything simple, yet overflowing with warmth, love, and truth. Margaret got up before sunrise. She made a light breakfast, looked at herself in the mirror wearing the same light blue dress she had sewn herself. Modest, elegant, and embroidered by hand, like everything she made, crafted with care, even without luxury. She pinned an old brooch to her chest, a gift from her late husband, and took a deep breath. She was ready. When she arrived at the church, the place was already full. Guests exchanged glances. There were smiling faces, teary eyes, and also quiet whispers. But Margaret walked in with confidence. She knew who she was. She knew everything she had overcome to be there, and nothing could take away the peace that lived in her heart. On the other side of the aisle, Victoria Caldwell watched in silence. She wore a light gray tailored outfit, hair perfectly styled, calm expression, but her eyes gave her away. Something inside her had changed. The impenetrable woman who once looked down on Margaret now saw something in her that no fortune could buy: honor. Emma entered to the sound of a simple string quartet. She wore a modest but beautiful dress, with delicate lace details she had chosen with Margaret's help. When she saw Andrew at the altar, the world seemed to stop for a second. They exchanged a silent look, the kind of look that doesn't need words. The pastor began the ceremony. The words were simple but deeply meaningful. When the time came for the vows, Andrew pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket. But before reading, he looked out at the guests, took a deep breath, and said, "Before I promise anything to Emma, I need to say something to my mother." Margaret's eyes widened. He turned to her, his voice trembling. "Mom, I know you worked in silence, that you saved every penny, that you gave up everything, so this day could happen. I found out. Emma told me. You let yourself be humiliated, treated coldly, and even so, you kept going, because you wanted to see this moment come true, and all of it without ever asking me for anything. Mom, you're the strongest person I know, and today, you're not just my mother. You are the soul of this wedding." The entire church fell silent. Margaret brought her hand to her mouth, eyes brimming with tears. Andrew stepped down from the altar, walked over to her, knelt at her feet and said, "Thank you, brave mother." A collective sob swept the room. Even Victoria couldn't hold back. She quietly pulled a tissue from her purse and wiped her eyes. It was the first time she allowed herself to be vulnerable in public. But what no one expected was what came next. After the ceremony, as everyone moved to the garden for the small reception, Andrew asked for everyone's attention. "We have one final tribute, a surprise my mother prepared." Margaret, without saying a word, walked over to a table covered by a white cloth. Carefully, she lifted it to reveal a 3-tier cake, decorated with sugar flowers and edible lace. "I made this cake myself," she said, voice trembling but steady, "with a recipe my husband wrote down before he passed away. He used to say a wedding needs 3 things: love, courage, and sweetness." Applause broke out spontaneously. Emma was crying. Andrew held her tightly. "And before we cut the cake," Margaret said, looking directly at Victoria, "I need to say something." The garden went quiet. Margaret walked slowly toward her former employer. They stood face to face, the brave mother in her simple blue dress, the wealthy woman in her flawless tailored outfit. 2 mothers, 2 stories, 2 worlds. "I hold no resentment, Miss Victoria. I just hope that one day you'll look at Emma and see that she didn't lose anything by loving a man like my son, and that love isn't about last names or bank accounts. It's about character. It's about roots." Victoria lowered her eyes. For a moment, she seemed ashamed. But then, she lifted her gaze and said, voice cracking, "Margaret, if my daughter has even half the strength you have, then I've already succeeded as a mother." They embraced, and in that embrace, the last wall between them crumbled. Hours later, as the guests were starting to leave, Victoria called Margaret aside in the garden. "I want to show you something," she said, handing her an envelope. Margaret hesitated. "You've already helped enough with the first one. This isn't money." Inside was a letter, handwritten, in elegant script, a letter of apology, complete, deep, admitting her prejudice, her pride, and recognizing that Margaret was the most dignified woman she had ever met. At the end of the letter, there was a proposal. Victoria wanted to start a small social business with her, a bakery for older women in vulnerable situations, where Margaret would be a partner and mentor. "If you need time to think, that's fine. But if you say yes, I want to start with the name that taught me more than any book ever could." At the bottom of the letter, the proposed name, Valorosa, baked with courage. Margaret smiled, and for the first time, not with that smile of someone who endures everything in silence, but with the smile of someone who had been seen, someone who was finally standing in the place she had always deserved. The wedding marked the beginning of a new era. Andrew and Emma moved forward, building a life that was simple, yet full of meaning. Margaret became a reference in the neighborhood, no longer just the devoted mother, but a symbol of resilience, wisdom, and quiet love. And Victoria, well, she was never the same again. The experience didn't just bring her closer to her daughter, it reconnected her with the real world. She learned that there's a wealth greater than status, the wealth of a heart that loves, learns, and grows from its own mistakes. And if this story touched your heart, if you saw in this brave mother a reflection of the strength that so many women quietly carry every single day, then I truly invite you to subscribe to this channel, because every story we share here is a reminder that a mother's love can overcome any barrier, even prejudice, pain, and silence. Leave a like, share this with someone who needs to hear it, and keep walking with us as we celebrate the life-changing power of love.